Ryan Nobles from CNN.
Fake news, fake news. I've got the emails coming already.
Good morning, Ryan Nobles. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, guys. How are you?
All right. Well, listen. Go ahead.
I just want you to feel bad for me because I'm about to board a flight to Hawaii.
Yeah, we heard.
Yeah.
We heard.
Now, is this a leisurely type? Are you going for leisure?
No, this
Work.
is all business. This is all business, Bill. As you know, the President of the United States is heading to a 12-day trip to Asia. The first leg of that trip is in Hawaii, so I'll be covering a leg in Hawaii.
All right,
so
very nice.
Get there.
Well, Be careful of the scorpions. I remember the old Brady Bunch episode. Beware.
And the tiki statues.
Yeah, there can be
Yes,
some
I'll be
real
looking for tiki statues. Yeah.
Hawaiian voodoo is a real thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, let's talk about these indictments, and I want to start off with Rob, who is a listener who who felt you were really good at the roast. But that's where it ends.
Are we still roasting Ryan?
Let's see. Where did his quote go? Ask Ryan. Oh, I've lost it. But basically, he's saying, ask Ryan how this is such a big deal. Actually, it was not Rob. It's Mario. So get ready for this one. Hey, ask Ryan how Manafort's indictment is bad for Donald Trump when the crimes in the indictment occurred in 2013-14 when he was working for Podesta and the Clintons. Go ahead. What do you think?
Well, I think his recollection of Manafort's history is a little bit off, but I guess the best way that I would describe this for Republicans and our Trump supporters is put yourself, switch the players around. And what if you had learned on, month 10 of the Obama administration that David Axelrod had been put under arrest for tax fraud and working with foreign governments without registering? Would you be as forgiving and would you remove him from the president as much as people seem to be willing to do with Paul Manafort? And obviously, Axelrod was still on with Obama after he took office, but I think the administration has worked pretty hard to distance itself from Paul Manafort. But the simple fact is that he was one of three people that was in charge of the campaign for a certain period of time. And Manafort and Trump have known each other for a long time. It's not as if their introduction to each other happened during the campaign. Their connections go far and deep.
Right.
And to the point that a lot of Republicans are making, that this happened long before he was involved in the campaign, it has nothing to do with the campaign. What does it say about the discernment and the background checks that go on by this president when he was selecting the person that was going to be in charge of his campaign? The idea that they just ignored all this and didn't matter, I think, is serious. But, the idea that you could have a former campaign chairman indicted on federal charges just shortly after he was involved in the campaign and think that's not a big deal is just laughable.
Yeah.
This is enormous. And, if Republicans just switched the players around and made the names Democrats, they would be just as up in arms as many Democrats are today.
I think that's a very valid point, and it is. I mean, and I hate to say, but we're so partisan today. If it's a Democrat that's charged with something, the Democrats are going to be like, well, give me a break.
Well, in
Come
fairness,
on.
we would have never heard about it.
Oh, you think that's the case? Oh, good one there.
Listen, Bill, I think, listen, I don't think that it's insignificant that Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother, was forced to leave the firm that they left. I don't think it's insignificant that the Democrats funded the Fusion GPS study, and that may have involved a foreign national. I think those things are all important. But one of the things that Trump supporters seem to keep forgetting is that Hillary Clinton is a private citizen.
Right.
Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Obviously, anything connected to him is going to get more attention than anything else. And the idea that we should just ignore this and pretend that this guy is just somehow a subsidiary member of the campaign, wasn't really all that involved, just didn't play that big of a role, is just not true. This is important. And the other thing, too, is that, you talk about Manafort all you want. There are two other people involved in this from yesterday. Rick Gates, who was, I described him as Robin to Manafort's Batman. This is his sidekick. He's been around with him for a long time. And Gates stayed on the campaign after Manafort left, and he helped to run the inauguration. He also still had regular contact with the president after he was inaugurated. And then, of course, the George Papadopoulos thing, which he might be a minor player. but still, he could be the key to linking this whole thing together.
How minor is he if he's been wearing a wire? And, we don't know that for a fact, but who has he talked to? What contact is he? I mean, I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions. It might turn out to be nothing. And, oh, by the way, if I could, Ryan, if the president's great at giving people nicknames and giving groups nicknames, of course, the snowflakes, Andrew loves to use that. I then charge back that if those liberal whack jobs are snowflakes, then these Trump-loving deniers of anything that Trump has done are really weeping willows, because all they're doing is crying like liberal babies. How could they do this to the president? It's unfair. The media is not fair. This whining is so unbecoming, and it's certainly not a virtue of a true conservative, in my opinion.
And I think, you really, truly, as a human being, need to take a step back and say, if you are fired up about Tony Podesta, if you are fired up about Uranium One, if you are fired up about the role that Hillary Clinton played when she was Secretary of State, if you are fired up about Benghazi, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be fired up about all those things. Those are all legitimate things. Those are all questions that need to be answered. Well, then why aren't you just as fired up about all of these things having to do with the President of the United States? And just like Democrats that, ignore the facts and ignore the conspiracies and controversies as it relates to Democrats, Republicans do the same exact thing when it comes to Republicans. And again, I go back to the fact that this man is currently in the White House. These are people directly connected to him and his campaign. This is a huge story with major implications. And the idea that we should just ignore it or act like the president doesn't have any connection to this at all is something that you'd be doing a disservice to the American people if you treated it that way.
Speaking of disservice, if the president were to fire Mueller, that would send shockwaves through Washington. And I think Republicans are coming out and saying his job is safe. Don't worry about that. You hearing?
Well, they're saying it, Bill. They're saying it. But here's the thing. The only person that can actually fire him right now is Donald Trump.
Right.
And as much as Bob Mueller may have the political cover from members of Congress, it's not codified in law.
Right.
And there's a very simple step that Republican members of Congress could take if they truly believe that Robert Mueller shouldn't be fired, and that is to pass a law that protects the special counsel from being fired by the President of the United States. That doesn't currently exist. So they can say all they want that they don't want the President to fire Robert Mueller, but all it would take is one call to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, by the President and tell Mueller it's over.
Right.
And the investigation would stop. So if Republicans are serious about that, they could take that step. And even though they're talking a good game, there's nobody willing to go that far.
All right. Obviously, it is the president. I think the president he's certainly been critical, but he's been somewhat contained and in control on this Mueller issue. Do you agree? I really expected after last weekend this to get really out of control with the president really defaming Mueller and the process, but I don't see as much of that via the tweet.
There's no doubt that he's reined it in significantly.
Yeah.
CNN broke the story Friday night that the indictments were coming, so I spent all weekend at the White House, and that was basically my job to hawk his Twitter feed to see if he was going to go off on it. He didn't tweet about it at all over the weekend. Tweeted about Democrats and Uranium One and Hillary Clinton, but he did tweet about it, shortly after the indictment came out. But he has certainly been restrained, and you have to imagine that's his counsel, Ty Cobb, who is the lawyer inside the White House, whose job it is to handle all the special counsel investigation, who's really trying to emphasize to the president that we need to let this investigation play out. And the other important thing is, this is, one of the reasons the president might be in this position is because he talks a little bit too much. The interview that he gave with Lester Holt about the reasons why he fired James Comey, if you remember, the initial statement said it was because how Comey handled the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. But then he told Lester Holt it was because of Russia.
Right.
And there's a good chance that could be part of the obstruction of justice investigation by the Mueller team. So I think that Ty Cobb is trying to tell the president, every time you say something, even via Twitter, that is something that could be a part of this investigation, and you need to be careful because you do not want to find yourself in a position where that could come back to haunt you. Now, the president, there's a pattern here with him, not to ramble on about this. He sometimes will rein himself in, but there's usually a statute of limitations on that. So if he's continuing to watch cable news and continuing to be fired up about what people are saying about him, I would not be surprised at all if he goes off.
It oftentimes will happen during the weekend, wee hours of a weekend morning. I want to clarify something because they're coming at you again here, saying that you're, one quote. Wow, Ryan is on crack. I don't believe that's true, but I'll say this.
I am not on crack.
I'll say it. Thank you, Ryan. I'm glad you clarified that. I'll say this though: you're not saying the president did anything wrong. You're saying this is important to note. You're saying that this is what investigators do. You follow the trail. And that can't what you're not saying there's guilt here and the president is connected and there's collusion. What you're saying is the investigation is worthy based on what's currently being uncovered.
And here's the thing, Bill, and I think I've told you this at least 4 or 5 different times. Donald Trump, if he truly is not guilty of anything, should welcome this investigation because the only way that he can get out from underneath the cloud of controversy as it relates to Russia is for Robert Mueller to issue a report that completely exonerates him.
Yeah.
And if he does that, this all goes away. Donald Trump will never have to worry about this again for the rest of his life. But he doesn't do that. He continues to call it a witch hunt. He continues to say that it's a waste of taxpayer money. For all your callers that are calling in and complaining and suggesting that we're making too big of a deal out of this, I wasn't the one who set up a meeting with someone from who was connected to the Russian government in Trump Tower with the express purpose of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton like Donald Trump's son did. I don't understand why people think that that's not worth being investigated and that's not worthy of being looked into. He is 100% innocent until proven guilty. But we need to let this investigation play itself out so that we can get all the facts. The American people are entitled to that because if the President of the United States was colluding with a foreign government, to help alter the results of the election or influence the results of the election, that is a major problem, and it goes to the core principles of our democracy. It deserves a full vetting.
I couldn't agree more. And by the way, you don't know what's going to come out of this investigation. Look what happened with Whitewater. That was and Monica Lewinsky, how that all came together. That was a part of an investigation. It wasn't the initial intent. Who knows who ends up getting who ends up getting themselves in hot water here? You just don't know.
And by the way, that for all of your listeners that are complaining that I care too much about one side or the other, I thought Whitewater was a completely appropriate investigation. That investigation needed to take place.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not impeachment was necessary, that's a whole different conversation. That's not for me to judge. But the investigation should have happened.
Right.
There was enough smoke there for an investigation. The investigation into the Iran-Contra affair during the Reagan administration, that should have happened. These are all things that happen in presidencies. Sometimes presidents are exonerated. Sometimes presidents are forced to resign. That's happened one time in American history. These things need to happen. It is fundamental to making sure that our democracy remains intact.
Well, and the key is we want to walk away knowing that that our elections are as secure as they could possibly be. I think that's important for Democrats and Republicans. So,
yeah.
All right, Ryan, we're over time. You just missed your flight. You're stuck. This is awful. All right. Listen, have a safe flight. Enjoy it. And we'll be watching on CNN as you cover the president in Hawaii.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. Ryan Nobles, who, I got to tell you, tells a mean roast joke.
He was good. He was good.
Except for Manansky, who he said just isn't worthy of one. That went over really well.